welcome, dear soul, to the Sleeping Hourglass. Tonight's journey takes us to the shadows just beyond the spotlight of history. You may know the trenches of the Western Front, the mud, the wire, the gas. But history is vast, and war spreads wider than any headline. Beyond that graveyard of Europe, other battles raged. Dustier, colder, quieter. The forgotten fronts. In the Balkans, in Anatolia, in the blistering deserts of Mesopotamia, and the frozen teeth of the Alps. Not generals and treaties, but frostbitten toes, cracked lips, and whispered letters never returned. And if this journey brings you comfort, feel free to subscribe or share a little ripple in the comments. It keeps this quiet space glowing, like a candle in the dusk. The river Miljacka moves slowly beneath the Latin bridge, a thin silver thread winding through the city like a sigh that has never stopped. It is morning, but the light feels old here. Heavy with memory, the air hums with a quiet tension, as if something invisible presses its hand gently against your chest. Footsteps echo on the cobblestones, and you follow them as though they belong to a ghost. Sarajevo is waking, but the past never sleeps. The city lies at the fault line of empires, a crossroads where east leans toward west, where minarets rise beside church spires and where whispers of rebellion mingle with songs of prayer. Ottoman roofs slope downward like tired shoulders, while Austro-Hungarian facades attempt to mask unease with grandeur. It is a place stitched together with delicate thread, beautiful, intricate, frayed. And on a morning like this, in June of 1914, a single breath will tear that thread apart. You pause beside the bridge. The stones beneath your feet are cool and smooth, worn by centuries of quiet passing. But on that day, there is no quiet. A motorcade hums. The Archduke Franz Ferdinand rides with his wife, Sophie. He wears a plumed hat, and she wears white gloves. They are here not just in ceremony, but in defiance. To show the empire's reach, its presence, its control. But the empire is made of paper. Gavrilo Princip waits near a delicatessen. He is slight, pale, younger than history makes him seem. His pockets hold a small pistol and a larger fear. He is not alone in his cause. The air in Sarajevo is thick with discontent, with whispered names of secret societies and borrowed ideals. They call themselves the Black Hand, but they are only shadows of a youth denied its own future. Their hearts beat for freedom or vengeance, or something they cannot quite name. When the shots ring out, the world flinches. 2 bullets. One pierces Sophie. The other strikes the Archduke. The blood darkens her gown. He gasps. She collapses. Their driver stares in horror. And in that moment, so brief, so brutal, the scaffolding of Europe begins to shudder. The event is over in seconds. But what follows will last for generations. You stand at the spot where it happened. There is no grand memorial. Just a brass plaque. Just the silence of strangers pausing, looking. Wondering how something so vast could begin in a place so small. But history often slips in through cracks. The Austro-Hungarian Empire demands apologies and concessions from Serbia. Serbia, cornered and proud, resists. Alliances stir like waking giants. Germany leans toward Austria. Russia leans toward Serbia. France prepares. Britain waits. And the machinery creaks to life, groaning under the weight of years of fear, ambition, and pride. It is not just the assassination. It is everything that came before. The powder was dry. The room was full of smoke. The match was simply late. And what follows is not swift justice or limited reprisal. It is not a border dispute. It is not a local war. It is an unraveling. A storm that pulls nations into its spiral until nearly every corner of the world feels its wind. But before the trenches, before the gas, before the thunder of artillery and the hollowed-out faces of millions, there is Sarajevo. There is this quiet city with its river and its rooftops, with its long memory and its short fuse. History will paint it in sharp lines. The trigger, the villain, the victim, the consequence. But the truth is softer and sadder. A boy with shaking hands. An empire that no longer believes in itself. A street that carries too many names. A morning like any other. And you walk it now, not to judge, but to remember. To feel the weight of what can begin with so little. A crooked route, a missed turn, a single second out of place. Even now, the shadows here feel longer than the buildings. They stretch behind every word, every stone, every breath. You pass a cafe, hear a radio playing, see children laughing. Life continues, of course it does. But Sarajevo remembers, and it asks us to remember too. Because what begins in this city does not end here. It spreads like ink on a map, and the places it reaches next are colder, higher, harder. The war has not yet begun, but already the world is leaning forward, about to fall. The wind moves eastward now, toward the jagged cliffs of Gallipoli, where young men will land, not knowing what waits beyond the water. And the sea will begin to burn. The sea shivers under the first grey light. It is April, and dawn stretches reluctantly over the Dardanelles. A narrow strait where history, once sailed under the banners of empires, long turned to dust. Now it is war again. And the tide carries not only ships, but memory. The waves speak in tongues the cliffs have heard before. Gallipoli. You stand now in the hush before landing, not on a battlefield yet, but in the breath before it begins. The boats are quiet, but full of hearts pounding like war drums. Inside them, boys from Australia, New Zealand, India, Britain. Many barely past 17, others clutching letters and rosaries. They have come believing this would be swift, perhaps even glorious. But war, as always, rewrites every story once it begins. They do not land where they are meant to. The coast is jagged, steep, unwelcoming. Instead of a flat beach, they find cliffs that rise like guardians. Gunfire greets them like a language no one taught them. The water is red before their boots touch land, and from above, Turkish defenders, led by Mustafa Kemal, hold their ground with brutal clarity. Their homeland is not a chessboard, it is sacred. They do not yield. What follows is not conquest, but stasis. Month after month of trenches carved into dry hills, where the sun bakes the earth by day and cold gnaws at bones by night. The dead are buried in shallow soil, then unearthed again by shells. Flies fill the air like prayer beads, unwound too fast. You walk slowly now through those same gullies. They are quiet, overgrown. But the silence does not feel empty. It feels full, as if the land has taken the stories and held them close. A boot heel here, a rusted water can there. The sea sighs below, still remembering. The campaign was meant to open a door. To break the Ottoman line, seize Constantinople, and provide a route to supply the Russians. But the plan was a dream of maps, not of earth and sea. It faltered at every step. And yet, in this failure, a strange kind of memory blooms. In Australia and New Zealand, Gallipoli becomes not just a defeat, but a baptism. Anzac Day is born, and with it, a national identity carved not in victory, but in valour. Letters home from the front speak less of tactics and more of stars above the trenches, of friendships, of jokes in the mud, of unbearable heat, unbearable waiting, and longing for mothers and sisters and girls they had not kissed. In the Turkish memory too, Gallipoli holds a flame. It becomes a story of resistance, of sacrifice. And from it will rise a leader, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, who will one day forge a republic from the crumbling bones of empire. So much death, and yet so much becoming. You feel the wind now. It sweeps across Anzac Cove with a voice like breath. Not angry, not triumphant, just steady. It whispers over the stones and broken trenches, across cemeteries where names have blurred, but love remains. Some gravestones simply say, "Known unto God." And that feels honest, because so much of what happened here remains beyond language. It lives instead in the way this place feels beneath your feet, in the hush that falls without asking, in the way the sea seems to mourn and forgive in the same gesture. Gallipoli is not only a place of loss, it is a place where illusion fell away, where youth cracked open, where the war, still young itself, revealed its teeth. As you walk the ridges, your shadow stretches alongside those who never left. Not in body, but in story. They are here, in the wind, the dust, the slow rhythm of waves. And though monuments stand, it is the land that remembers more faithfully, not in marble, but in silence. The wind carries you now toward the mountains of the Balkans, where war was already a familiar song, and sorrow had learned to speak before the rest of Europe could listen. The Balkans do not begin with war. They remember it. It is stitched into the forests, carved into the ridges, whispered in stone monasteries where prayers are spoken for the dead whose names have no tombs. The land itself seems ancient and watchful, as if it has seen too much to be surprised any more. And in the summer of 1914, when Europe fractures open, the Balkans do not erupt. They echo. This is a land that has long existed in the shadows of empires. The Ottoman yoke, the Austro-Hungarian press, Russian ambitions, all have passed through here, claiming, dividing, extracting. Serbia, small but proud, wears its scars like armour. Its people have long understood something the rest of Europe is only beginning to learn. That survival is not given. It is earned day by bitter day. You walk now among the mountains, not gently rolling hills, but jagged spines that seem to resist every step. The wind here is sharp and dry, filled with the scent of pine, gunpowder, and smoke. Villages clutch the cliffs like secrets. Paths are narrow, everything feels close. Danger, memory, faith. In 1914, when the Austro-Hungarian Empire declares war on Serbia in retaliation for the assassination in Sarajevo, the first shots of the Great War echo through these valleys. But Serbia has been here before. It has already buried its youth in wars for independence, in resistance against the Ottomans, in the Balkan Wars that tore through the region just years earlier. Its army is small, but it knows the terrain. It knows how to wait, to strike, to vanish. The first invasion comes quickly. Austria sends men into Serbia, expecting swift victory. Instead, they meet mud, disease, and defiance. The Serbs retreat, then counterattack. At the Battle of Sur, they push the Austrians back. It is the first Allied victory of the war. But it is not a triumph, it is a delay. The weight is coming, and it will not relent. In the harsh winter that follows, typhus sweeps through the population like fire through dry grass. Hospitals overflow. Bodies are buried in shared graves. Doctors from across Europe come to help, and many never return. The enemy now is not just armies. It is cold, hunger, and disease. The front is everywhere. You pass now through a ruined farmhouse. The walls are blackened, the windows gone. But on the stones, faint markings remain. Letters carved by a soldier's knife, perhaps, or a mother marking her child's height. These are the true borders of war, drawn not on maps, but in grief. In 1915, the tide turns harder. Germany and Austria regroup. Bulgaria joins them, seeking revenge and territory. From the north, the west, and the east, Serbia is crushed. The government flees. The army retreats through the mountains of Albania. It is a march of death, snow, starvation, exhaustion. Tens of thousands perish along the way. But still they move forward, because stopping is not an option. You follow that path now, along what is known as the Albanian Golgotha. Frozen rivers, sheer cliffs, villagers giving bread to soldiers with frostbitten hands. Men too weak to speak, but still walking. They carry not just rifles, but memory, the weight of a nation that refuses to vanish. Eventually, what remains of the Serbian army is evacuated to Corfu. They rest, rebuild, regroup. And from there, they will return, years later, to liberate their homeland. But the scars remain. Serbia loses over a quarter of its population in the war. Whole families disappear. Entire villages become cemeteries, yet the country endures. Not with celebration, but with solemnity. Its survival is not a flag waved in pride. It is a grave visited in silence. The Balkans do not forget, and they do not allow forgetting. You stand now on a mountain ledge overlooking the valley below. Evening has begun to gather in folds of blue and grey. A church bell rings in the distance. Soft, but insistent. It is not mourning, it is remembering. This place does not give itself easily. It demands patience, respect, listening. And in that listening, you begin to understand. The Balkans are not simply a place on the map, they are a question. What does it mean to endure? What does it cost to survive? And can a country built on memory ever truly rest? Below, the land stretches outward. Fields where nothing grew for years. Streets once flooded with refugees, now lined with olive trees and open windows. But the silence never fully lifts. Because war, once it passes, leaves something behind, not just loss, but the knowledge of what it takes to live through it. The air grows colder as the path winds northward, toward the frozen heights of the Caucasus, where soldiers will vanish into snow, and winter itself will become a weapon. There are places where war echoes, and there are places where it disappears. The Caucasus is the latter, a long spine of mountains stretching from the Black Sea to the Caspian. Sharp and ancient, holding the sky in jagged teeth. It is a place where silence does not simply fall. It burrows, deeper than time. And in the winter of 1914, that silence becomes a grave. The Russian Empire and the Ottoman Empire meet here, not in cities or on familiar plains, but high above. In cold, nobody can outlast. You walk now along one of these ridgelines, your breath leaving in quiet clouds. The snow glows faintly under a pale sky, and the wind does not howl. It hums, low and endless. Beneath your feet, you imagine the echo of boots from men who passed this way with rifles slung and hope tucked under threadbare coats. The campaign begins as empires shift their weight eastward. Russia eyes Ottoman territory with old ambition. The Ottomans, newly entered into the war, seek to strike a blow before the Tsar's forces can consolidate. What unfolds is not a battle, it is an undoing. December 1914. The Ottomans launch an offensive into the Caucasus. A bold winter campaign through terrain that has humbled kings and buried prophets. Led by Enver Pasha, they march into snowdrifts and freezing rivers, into mountains unfamiliar, even to their maps. They are told it will be quick. That glory waits on the other side of the pass. But winter does not negotiate. Temperatures fall below -20 degrees. Soldiers sleep in tents that tear in the wind. Frostbite takes fingers, then feet. Horses collapse from exhaustion and are eaten by the men who once rode them. And when the Russians counterattack at Sarıkamış, they are not only fighting soldiers, they are fighting ghosts. Men too frozen to resist, too lost to retreat. Entire regiments vanish beneath snow. Of the 90,000 Ottoman troops who begin the march, nearly 60,000 do not return. Not all fall to bullets. Many simply stop and are never found. You feel that stillness now. It is not mournful. It is vast. The kind of stillness that comes after the world has said too much. Even the trees here seem cautious, as if remembering. Their limbs bare, their trunks scarred by shell fragments now buried under ice. But war in the Caucasus is not a single tragedy. It is a long ache. After Sarıkamış, the front stabilizes into smaller skirmishes, long patrols, harsh winters repeated again and again. Villages are emptied, not by invasion, but by need. Fathers vanish into the army, sons into the snow. Mothers wait with stoves that have no more wood. The soldiers here are not only Turkish and Russian. They come from Armenia, Georgia, Azerbaijan, Kurdistan. They speak in dozens of dialects, but scream in the same tongue when cold enters the bone. You kneel now beside a low cairn, a pile of stones, half sunken, unmarked. There is no name here, no inscription, only the knowledge that someone, once, thought enough to cover the body with care. A gesture of dignity in a place where even time seems to forget. But the cold is not the only cruelty in these mountains. In 1915, as the Ottoman war effort begins to falter, internal fears turn outward. The Armenians, a Christian minority long accused of dual loyalties, become the target of suspicion, then violence. Deportations begin, then forced marches, then mass killings. Some of the soldiers who survive Sarikamish are ordered not back to the front, but against their own neighbours. The Armenian genocide begins not with thunder, but with silence, with disappearances, closed shutters, unanswered doors. Entire villages are marched into the desert. Some fall in the mountains before ever leaving. Here, history bleeds into snow, and footprints vanish as quickly as they're made. You look up toward the peaks. The clouds drift slowly, as if afraid to move too fast. And below them, thousands of stories lie beneath ice, untold, unnamed, unfinished. It is easy to see war in terms of strategy. Lines drawn, victories claimed, treaties signed. But in the Caucasus, there are no clean lines. Only wind-blown paths, collapsed shelters, and the ache of a place that never asked to become a battlefield. Yet the war leaves something behind, not in monuments, but in memory. The generations that follow here speak quietly about the past. Some do not speak at all, but in the silence is a kind of music, a rhythm made of survival, of endurance, of standing still while empires fall around you, and the snow, though it covers, does not erase. It remembers everything. Even now, as you stand here, the hush of the mountains presses against your chest, not cruelly, not unkindly, but with the weight of truth. That not all war ends in flame. Some wars fade into ice. Follow the wind now as it sweeps westward toward deserts that do not freeze, but scorch, where empire turns to mirage and betrayal waits beneath shifting sands. The war does not reach Armenia with the clamour of tanks or the thunder of cavalry. It arrives quietly on the backs of rumours, in the hush of telegrams, in the cold shuffle of boots outside a door. While the Western Front drowns in mud and machine fire, here the weapon is silence. Silence and erasure. The sun rises over the Anatolian highlands, casting gold over stone villages and narrow footpaths. Here, life moves slowly. Bread is baked before dawn, and water is drawn from wells that remember 100 years of hands. In these mountain towns, the Armenian people have sung lullabies older than nations. But now the lullabies grow thin. Fewer voices, fewer children. The year is 1915. The Ottoman Empire, already cracking under the pressure of war, turns inward. It sees enemies not just at its borders, but in the faces of its own citizens. Armenians, who have lived on this land for centuries, who have tended its soil, carved their churches into its cliffs, buried their ancestors under its apricot trees. A policy becomes a whisper becomes a list becomes an order, and so it begins, with arrests in the night, the intellectuals taken first. Writers, priests, teachers, anyone who might have words strong enough to resist forgetting. They vanish before the rest understand what is coming. There are no battles here, only departures. Families told to leave with a day's rations, promised safety, promised return. And so they go, barefoot down stony roads, grandmothers holding infants, sons holding the hands of fathers who cannot speak through their grief. The roads are long, not just in distance, but in sorrow. They stretch into deserts that do not end. Some die of thirst, others from the cold. Some are taken by disease, some by the bayonet, but most are taken by time. Their names fall through history like ash through wind. Along these roads there are no monuments, no flags, no treaties, only bones under sand and memories carried by those few who survived. Children who watched their mothers buried by strangers. Women who walked alone for days after the men were separated, never to be seen again. Elders who lost whole villages in a single sunrise. In the deserts of Deir ez-Zor, where the Euphrates loses itself to heat, the dead do not cry. They do not shout. They do not accuse. They simply remain. A silence so vast, it echoes across generations. The world watches, but does not speak. Too busy with its own bleeding. Too unwilling to believe such emptiness could be man-made. Years will pass. Borders will shift. Empires will fall. But this loss, this silence, remains unrecognized, disbelieved, denied. A century later, the word genocide will finally be spoken by some, though others still look away. But a people does not forget, even when the world does. The Armenian diaspora becomes a living archive. In Boston, Paris, Beirut, and Los Angeles, the descendants of the marched carry their grandparents' stories like heirlooms, fragile, sacred, unfinished. They speak of Mount Ararat, of the smell of lavash baking, of songs sung at dusk, when home still had a roof. They build churches shaped like memory. They write poems with names that once filled school registers and now leave only in stone. Each April they gather, not in anger, though there is plenty of that, not even in vengeance, but in remembrance. For remembrance is a form of resistance against forgetting, against silence, against the idea that some lives are too small, too inconvenient to be grieved. Because this was not a battlefield. It was a cradle emptied, a language muted, a culture uprooted and scattered to the wind. And yet, despite it all, something remains. A heartbeat passed down, a lullaby remembered, a flame, small, flickering, but unextinguished. History does not always scream. Sometimes it barely whispers. And sometimes it is those whispers that carry the heaviest truths. So we sit with them now beneath the night sky, listening. Not just to the names, but to the silence between them. The silence that still waits to be heard. And in that silence, a question endures. What happens when even memory is forced to migrate? Beyond the shadow of Erasure, we drift now toward the winds of Arabia, where empire and desert meet in whispers of revolt. The sun rises differently over East Africa, not in a fanfare of gold, but in the hush of heat. It creeps slowly over the horizon, pressing its weight onto forests, hills, and bones. There is no battle line here, no fixed trench, just the long, endless march. Here, war walks. It moves not with tanks or cavalry, but with bare feet and parched throats. It stumbles over termite hills and through swamps. It coughs with fever, wheezes in the brush, and bleeds without witnesses. In the East African campaign of the First World War, battle is not loud. It is quiet attrition, a slow, evaporating breath of men and memory. The German commander, Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck, is already a ghost by the time his story reaches Europe. A phantom general leading an army of shadows. White officers, a handful of colonial Germans, and thousands of African Askari soldiers. He has no supply line, no homeland to return to. Yet he drifts, undefeated, through 4 years of impossible terrain, carrying war deeper into the continent, far beyond what maps can follow. And behind him, always the march. The British, too, come in waves. Indian soldiers, South Africans, Rhodesians, and the native porters who outnumber all of them. For every soldier, dozens of men and women walk with cargo on their heads, rifles, crates, tents, cannons. They carry the war on their backs while it eats away at their bodies. The porters die not in skirmishes, but in silence, from hunger, dysentery, and tsetse flies. There are no monuments for them. Some call this campaign a footnote, but it stretches longer than the war in the West, longer than the life expectancy of those who march it. The land fights harder than any army. Rain falls in sheets and evaporates in heat. Malaria waits in still water. Lions follow the smell of blood. Villages vanish, swallowed by requisition. Fields are stripped of millet and cassava to feed armies that do not belong to them. Cattle die. Crops fail. And in some places famine is what war leaves behind. But still they march. They march through forests where branches scrape skin like bayonets, through rivers that sweep men downstream like broken leaves, through valleys that echo only with breath and burden. For hundreds of miles, the war exists only as movement. There are names, of course. Tanga, Kilimanjaro, Lake Tanganyika, but they blur in memory like landmarks seen from the edge of fever. Here, geography is less place than endurance. The body remembers what the map forgets. Some of the soldiers are boys. Some are husbands, conscripted far from home. Some are veterans of earlier conquests, now handed rifles with no promises. Some come for coin, some from coercion, some from loyalty that history won't remember. They build bridges, dig roads, cut paths into forest that swallows their footprints by nightfall. They fight when commanded, but mostly they wait. They wait for food, for orders, for the rain to stop, for disease to pass, for death to choose someone else. But in the stillness of these in-between moments, life endures. At campfires, stories are shared in Swahili, Chichewa, Kikuyu, and tongues no officer understands. In the dust, children draw shapes with sticks while their mothers boil roots for medicine. There is music, even here. Hollow gourds become drums. War songs twist into lullabies. There are marriages, prayers, births. Even in retreat, some carry love like a secret pouch close to the chest. It is not the generals who remember the names of the dead. It is the comrades, the widows, the elders. It is the child who waits at a well for a father who does not return. It is the soil that knows whose weight pressed upon it last. These are the memories without medals, soft and endless. By war's end, the East African campaign has taken over 100,000 African lives, most of them civilians and porters, not from bullets, from burden, from exhaustion, from being walked to the edge of the world and back until the body gave way. Von Lettow, Vorbeck returns to Germany a hero. He is the only German commander never defeated in the field. But his army's survival is built on the silence of others. The silence of women who starved when crops were seized. Of men who marched with fever until their legs collapsed. Of children who grew up with too many names missing from the table. These voices are not written in European newspapers, but they are kept in song, kept in stone, kept in stories told while grinding maize beneath an acacia tree at dusk. History bends toward the loud, but memory listens differently. Tonight, the wind still passes over the bush as it did then. The leaves still move in rhythms older than war. Somewhere, the footprints of those who walked vanish beneath grass, but the path remains. It remains not on paper, but in the aching steps of those who carried everything and were almost remembered. Some battles are fought with flags and rifles, others with footsteps and silence. But history does not always know which one left the deeper wound. And as Europe claws its way back into the mud of its trenches, one empire watches its shadow shrink and fade. The desert does not kneel. It is older than parchment, older than empire. It has swallowed chariots, caliphs, and crusaders alike, their bones ground into powder, their banners tattered into wind. And now, in the heat-hazed years of the Great War, the desert stretches once again beneath foreign eyes who do not see it clearly. The Ottomans hold maps that mark Arabia in borders and ink, but here nothing is fixed. The dunes shift, and the tribes roam, and the stars govern more than law. Lines drawn in far-off palaces vanish with the sunrise. A railway slices through the sand, the Hejaz line, meant to bind the empire's reach from Damascus to Mecca. But steel and steam mean little here. Saboteurs rise from nowhere, lay explosives, vanish like ghosts. It is not war as Europe knows it. It is resistance like water, soft, persistent, impossible to grasp. In this strange theatre, the British do not send legions. They send a whisper. T.E. Lawrence, scholar, soldier, dreamer, moves through the desert draped in Arab robes and contradictions. He is neither one of them nor fully apart. His voice carries promises, gold, freedom, nationhood, words too light to bear the weight they will carry. But in the ears of tribes wearied by Ottoman demands, the words are kindling. And so, the flame spreads. It is a war of raids and retreats. No trenches, no front. Only camel columns that vanish into horizons, Camp struck before dawn, rifles fired from ridge lines, then silence. The Bedouin warriors know this land like memory. The salt of dry wells, the taste of sand in tea, the wind's howl that means a storm is near. Their loyalty is not bought but borrowed, fleeting like dew. They fight not just for promises, but for old pride, old wounds, and the chance to cast out a power that speaks their names with foreign mouths. Aqaba falls not to cannon but to cunning. The attack comes from the land, not the sea, a direction the Ottomans never dreamed. When the British ships finally arrive, their guns silent, the town already waves a new flag. Victory in Arabia often comes when no one is looking. But not all victories are clean. With every alliance struck, another is frayed. Rival tribes pull against one another, seeking spoils, not unity. And the British promises begin to unravel, thread by thread. Behind Lawrence, agreements are signed in secret rooms. Lines drawn again, but sharper this time. Lines that do not see Bedouin lives, only oil, routes, spheres of influence. Lawrence begins to feel the weight of his words. In his letters, there is wariness. He writes of fighting beside men who will not receive the land they are dying for, of carrying dreams in both hands only to see them slip through his fingers. The desert too watches. It is not fooled by flags or treaties. It has seen this before. The march of empire across its face, the ambition of men burning out like fireflies. Still, the rebellion grows. Damascus is taken. But it is not the victory it seemed. The British do not hand it to Arab hands. They keep it, manage it, weigh it against French ambitions. The freedom that was promised becomes a negotiation behind glass. In time, Lawrence disappears from Arabia. He returns to England, to shadows, to regret, to a silence louder than triumph. The Bedouin remain, their hopes folded into memory. Some adapt, some resist. The new rulers wear suits instead of robes, but the struggle remains. A story of voice and power, of who gets to decide the future, and the sand keeps moving. Today, travelers walk across that same desert and feel none of the battles. The wind has swept the bullet casings away. But in the quiet, if one listens, there is a hum beneath the earth. A pulse of rebellion, of broken trust, of a people who learned that the price of freedom was never measured in promises. Arabia could not be ruled because it was never truly conquered, only borrowed briefly. Like water drawn from a deep well, it slips back into darkness when the vessel cracks. And now, as power redraws itself in smoky rooms and imperial ink, a new front begins to smoulder. Not in sand or snow, but in whispers and unrest across the seas. To the west, in Russia, revolution is no longer just an idea. It is a fire lit beneath a crumbling throne. The mountain air tastes like iron and regret. It weaves through narrow valleys, carved by ancient glaciers, rising until it chills even the breath of death. These are the Alps, silent, vast, indifferent. They cradle peaks above 5,000 meters, and here, amid the crests, war finds its cruelest form. Thin air, cracking ice, a sky so close it seems to crush the horizon. In 1915, Italy opens a front against Austria-Hungary, believing the mountains will protect as much as they challenge. But these cliffs know no allegiance. They are ancient, blind, and unstoppable. They will teach both armies, slowly, how small men are. You follow a cable car path now, not suspended in the air, but in memory. The creak of its ghostly cables seems to echo with past burdens. The stretchers hauled upward, the bodies lowered secretly, the whispered orders shouted across snowfields. In the valleys below, villages hear distant thunder. Up here, thunder is avalanche, not artillery. It falls without warning, swallowing trenches in one great exhale of ice. The soldiers live in patches of rock pressed to the sky. They carve trenches into stone. They excavate ice caves, laying down straw and blankets, hoping warmth can be stolen from cold. They lace their hands with grips and rods, and pray a hold won't snap. Their uniforms stiffen in frost, their eyes reflect white landscapes morphing into brighter white. The sun, unfiltered by ozone, burns with glare. It bakes their skin cold and sears eyes until they flood. In winter, avalanches are the final verdict. Artillery may shatter walls of ice, but gravity finishes the sentence. Entire plateaus vanish beneath tons of snow. Then the snow melts in spring and corpses emerge again, preserved in stillness like statues of regret. Soldiers remove their hats in absence. They scribble names on wood. They press letters into pockets. Later, they speak in hushed tones about cliffs that remember. In summer, the war shifts but remains above the clouds. Rats infest frozen bunkers. Water drips from ice into aluminum cans, half frozen, half kneaded. They speak of home, olive trees, southern suns, laughter beside the sea. They speak of frostbite, fingers and toes claimed by mountains that do not question. Some have lost their communion with cold. They see frost in their dreams. They hear ice cracking at midnight. The Austro-Hungarian soldiers fare no better. They, too, have fatherland, hopes, futures. They belong to a dying empire, riven by nationality beneath its uniform. Czech voices mingle with Hungarian. Croatian curses entangle with German hymns. Here, on glacier fields, they are strangers together, separated only by trenches a few paces apart. Sometimes they shout pleas to surrender, sometimes they pray for snow to fall. Simple gestures become holy. A shared supply of tinned milk between trench lines. A crumpled photograph placed on a boulder. A lullaby humming through open ears while artillery sleeps. The border becomes intimate here. Not on maps, but on skin. An unexpected letter passed between enemies. A piece of bread tossed across a neutral ridge. If one looks up, sees the sky, sees white peaks, one may see that grief is universal. But grief does not stop the war. In 1917, Italy launches the Caporetto offensive, not in the mountains, but across the Piave Valley. The collapse sends shockwaves uphill and down, command fractures, morale crumbles. But in the Alps, the war does not collapse, it stiffens. Lines hold. Snow fortifies trenches. You feel this stiffness now, in the way ice resists your foot, in the way wind bites your cheeks. The mountain says you may falter, but I endure. Winter returns. The war continues, but it shifts again. The front becomes administrative. Rotation schedules, supply lines, simple survival. Tunnels are carved into glaciers, where men live, pray, die. They write letters scratched on aluminum. They dream of cherries in Bari, honey drizzled on bread, salted sweat of harvest. They dream of each other. After all, nothing grows above the clouds. Above them, there is only loss and echo. Every scream rings twice, once in air, once in memory. Every drop of blood stains snow and waits until it melts into streams. Every life claimed is carried down in the thaw, murmuring beneath new life. In November 1918, the war ends. Italy signs at Villa Giusti, but up here, on the cliffs, the news arrives late, carried by wind, scavenged by eagles, whispered by messengers. The war is over, but ice does not forget. The avalanches stop, but not the silence. The trenches remain half filled with snowmelt, the bunkers sag, rifles rust. The Alps watch still. Now you stand on a ridge where once a bunker loomed. You feel the bleeding crack beneath your feet. You set one foot ahead of the other, slow, careful, as though you carry a prayer. The air is thin, your lungs ache. But your heart remembers what the mountains teach. Endurance is not victory, it is presence. It is standing where no one else can stand and listening. The Alps keep their echoes. And sometimes, when the wind finds a certain rock, you may hear laughter. Italian, German, Slavic, drifting across time. A lullaby, a prayer, a curse, all the same. As you descend now from stone and sky, the air grows warmer and denser, and soon you will step into valleys where rivers flow again. Toward the rivers of the Tigris and Euphrates, where the land may betray you not with cold, but with water. The land between two rivers, Mesopotamia. Its very name means between waters. Though the rivers themselves are old and sly, and not to be trusted, the Tigris runs sharp, swift, and dark. The Euphrates, slower, almost mournful. They braid the land like veins, nourishing it with secrets and betrayal in equal measure. Here, the dust knows more than it should. It has listened to prayers in Sumerian, in Akkadian, in Aramaic, Arabic, Persian, Turkish, and now English. It remembers kings who called themselves gods. Towers that reached for heaven and broke. It remembers invaders who marched under sun-washed banners thinking they had conquered time. In 1914, the British come not to worship, but to hold, to protect oil in Persia, to keep India linked by sea. They land near Basra, where the river meets the salt and the marshes whisper like ghosts. British troops, joined by Indian soldiers in unfamiliar boots, advance slowly north, toward Baghdad. But they are not the first empire to march inland, thinking the rivers will guide them. They are not the first to be swallowed. The sun here does not just burn, it empties. It turns sweat into dust, lungs into sieves. In summer, the heat feels like being watched, closely, silently, by something ancient. Kut is a bend in the Tigris, a modest town with Ottoman roots. It becomes a trap. In late 1915, British General Townshend pushes his tired men too far north. The Turks push back harder. He retreats to Kut, and the siege begins. Months pass. Food vanishes. Men die of dysentery. from wounds that stink and won't close, from hunger so deep it gnaws at memory. Indian soldiers boil boots, mules are eaten, rats become a prize. The river, once their path, now betrays them. Relief expeditions fail. The Turkish artillery waits like time itself, patient, inevitable. In April 1916, after 147 days, the British surrender. More than 13,000 men fall into Ottoman hands. It is one of the worst British military defeats of the war. And yet, in the headlines back home, it is only a ripple. This is not France, not Flanders. The Mesopotamian campaign is far, abstract, easy to forget. But for those who marched, who fought, who died beneath the impossible sun, there is nothing abstract at all. In the months that follow, the British reorganize. They return with more men, more planning, and fewer illusions. Baghdad finally falls in 1917. The city, ancient and crumbling, does not welcome them with fanfare. It has known too many empires. The British walk its streets like inheritors of dust. The books of old Baghdad, once the light of the world, are gone, burned, rotted, forgotten. Tomes of caliphs lie cracked and quiet. The gardens of the Abbasids are weeds now. Babylon waits nearby, a heap of broken bricks and echoes. And still, they stay. British officials set up governance. They draw lines on maps that don't understand the wind. They try to rule a land older than law, but the land pushes back. In 1920, rebellion surges like the floodwaters of spring. Iraqis, Sunni, Shia, tribal, urban, rise. They are tired of foreign boots, of distant kings. They do not want to be the corridor between London and Delhi. It takes months to put the revolt down. Thousands die. And even then, nothing holds. Mandates, monarchs, constitutions, they come and go like seasons that never settle. The rivers keep flowing. They carry away bones. They whisper of Gilgamesh, who sought immortality and found only loss. Of Nebuchadnezzar, who built wonders that now lie buried. Of British soldiers, sunstruck and lost, whose names no one remembers. Some places do not want to be ruled. Some lands cannot be held. The desert does not forget. And history, real history, does not care who wins. Empires walk into Babylon dreaming of glory. They leave with dust on their tongues. And as the ruins of old dreams crumble beneath new flags, the question lingers, what is empire, if not exile dressed in gold? There is a quiet resolve in the heart of a small kingdom, a belief fragile as frost on a leaf, that timing can rewrite fate. Romania watches the Great War unfold from behind the Carpathians, a silent witness to the thunder rolling across Europe. For 2 long years, it waits, listening, weighing, hoping the scales of power might tip just enough to favor a dream that has lingered in its blood for centuries. That dream is unification, a single Romanian people, drawn from the scattered lands of Transylvania, Bukovina, and Bessarabia. People split by old borders, imperial lines, the fault lines of empire. The heart of Romania beats not only for itself, but for those across the mountains who share its tongue, its songs, its longing. But dreams, even noble ones, are dangerous when the world is burning. It is the summer of 1916. The great powers are bleeding on all fronts. France clings to Verdun, Russia staggers under its own weight, and the British dig deeper into Flanders mud. Romania, after years of neutrality, chooses its moment. It signs a treaty with the Allies and steps into the war. It is a bold move, and a late one. At first, hope blossoms. Romanian troops sweep into Transylvania, welcomed as liberators by villages that have waited a lifetime for such a sight. There are flowers in the streets. Children run beside soldiers in worn boots. The sun still shines on their helmets, but the mountains are deceptive. Behind the smiles lie cold ridges and narrow passes, and beyond those passes waits something darker. The dual force of German precision and Austro-Hungarian resolve, soon joined by Ottoman and Bulgarian armies. Romania, small and stretched thin, is surrounded. The push into Transylvania halts, then crumbles. The Germans respond with silent fury, under the command of Erich von Falkenhayn and August von Mackensen. They strike in from two sides, through the southern passes of the Carpathians and from the south across the Danube. The Romanian army, poorly equipped and hastily trained, cannot hold. Their lines snap like branches under snow. Bucharest falls in December. There are no parades this time, only columns of refugees trailing behind wagons, the smell of smoke rising from once proud buildings. The royal court flees to Iași in the northeast. The capital lies silent under occupation, its tramcars empty, its windows shattered. But in the forests and mountains, the dream does not die. Guerrilla fighters, shepherds, students, old veterans of older wars, begin to stir. They know the terrain better than any map. They sleep beneath pine trees, send coded messages through village churches, and strike at night like shadows. The countryside becomes a quiet battlefield where the air is thick with snow and fear. In Iași, the government tries to hold what little remains. Typhus sweeps through the makeshift hospitals. There are not enough blankets, not enough bread, but still songs are sung around small fires. Schoolchildren write poems of hope. Women sew flags they are not yet allowed to wave. Romania bleeds, but it does not surrender, and across the border, in Russia, revolution begins to boil. The Tsar falls. Lenin rises. The Eastern Front trembles under a new uncertainty, and with it, Romania's lifeline begins to fade. When Russia exits the war in 1917, Romania is left alone again. A quiet, trembling silence falls over the kingdom. In May of 1918, under pressure too great to bear, Romania signs a peace treaty with the Central Powers. It is bitter. The dream, it seems, has frozen mid-breath. But empires have a way of crumbling in silence. By the autumn of that same year, the war turns. The Germans are stretched, the Austro-Hungarians splintering, the Ottomans crumbling at the edges. Romania watches, waits again, and on November 10th, a single day before the armistice, it re-enters the war. A symbolic return, a whispered reminder, we are still here. And when the dust settles, something extraordinary happens. Despite defeat, despite occupation, Romania emerges into peace larger than it entered into war. Transylvania, Bukovina, and Bessarabia unite with the kingdom. The dream is not only remembered, it is written into the maps. A greater Romania, however fragile, is born, but the cost is deep. Over 300,000 Romanians are dead. Towns lie broken, their churches charred and hollow. Families scattered by war cannot always find each other again. There are still soldiers sleeping beneath the Carpathians, their graves unmarked but not forgotten. And yet, in the shadows of these losses, something quiet lingers. A sense that courage, even delayed, can still bear fruit. That a nation can step too late and still arrive in time to matter. The Carpathians remain tall, quiet, unchanged, but the story beneath their peaks now holds more than snow and stone. It holds memory, and the faint, flickering glow of a kingdom that dared. And just beyond the mountains, another echo waits. Not in a nation, but in an idea. An empire built on ink and doubt, now unraveling from within. We turn now to Russia, to a revolution that promises everything and leaves behind a silence that swallows whole. There is a silence colder than any snow. It settles over the Eastern Front like breath on a mirror. Quiet and unreal, it is the silence of too many dead, too many promises broken, too many men standing ankle deep in mud and doubt, unsure what side of history they now belong to. Russia, the vast and wary giant, groans beneath the weight of its war. The Tsar dreams of empire from his winter palace, but frost blooms in the bones of his soldiers. Across the forests and frozen steppes, trains stutter and stall. Boots rot. Letters from home arrive too late or not at all, and always the war. A war that began with pride, with brass buttons and holy blessings. A war the Tsar believed would unite a fractured nation. But war, when fed to the hungry, becomes poison. By 1917, the front lines are not just lines. They are questions. Why do we fight? Who do we serve? And what comes next? The Russian soldier, wrapped in rags, squints into the smoke of another useless barrage. He smells gunpowder and wet wool, the sour musk of fear. He hears orders shouted in languages he barely understands, watches officers warm their hands while he eats frost from his beard. Somewhere near Galicia, a company refuses to charge. The officer draws his pistol. The men turn theirs on him. These are no longer isolated cracks. They are widening fault lines. Whole regiments disobey. Commanders desert. Bullets are traded for bread. And behind them, far from the front, Petrograd is already burning. Revolution does not ask permission. It rises like steam from broken pipes, hisses through factory alleys, spills into streets. It does not wait for generals. It does not kneel before thrones. In February, the Tsar abdicates. In March, Soviets form. In April, Lenin returns. By summer, Russia is no longer at war with Germany. Not really. It is at war with itself. The provisional government pleads with the Allies. Russia still fights. But the trenches know better. The soldiers know what their hands feel. Emptiness, not weapons. They know what their eyes see. Leaders who argue while others freeze. They no longer trust the maps. They trust only each other. And so the army, once millions strong, begins to rot from within. Not with cowardice, but with clarity. What use is victory abroad when there is famine at home? What honor lies in orders shouted from cities that can't even feed their children? The corner of a fair cracks what little unity remains. Then, in October, the Bolsheviks seize power like a thief taking back stolen time. The war, for Russia, ends not with treaties, but with silence. In March of 1918, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk is signed. Germany carves away the western limbs of the fallen Colossus. Ukraine, the Baltics, Finland, Belarus. A steep price. But peace, for Lenin, is worth it. The Western powers call it betrayal. The Russian people call it breath. But peace does not last. Not here. Not yet. From the ashes of war rises a new fire. Civil war, reds and whites. Cossacks and commissars. Foreign armies arrive. British, French, American, Japanese. Like moths to a house already burning. The Eastern Front disappears, not because it is over, but because it is everywhere now. Every village, every field, every heart. It is no longer war between nations. It is war within the soul of a nation. The Russian soldier, once a pawn in imperial games, becomes something else. He is now rebel, brother, ghost, machine. He fights not with loyalty, but with longing. For bread, for land, for something that feels like meaning. And still the snow falls. And still the wolves wait. In the distance, far beyond the chaos, the Tsar and his family wait in quiet exile, not for rescue, but for erasure. In a cellar in Ekaterinburg, the dynasty ends not with fanfare, but with gunshots. 17 centuries of empire undone in a night no one hears. Russia is no longer an empire. It is a question mark. And as the dust of revolution settles into the deep rots of the steppe, as new flags rise over old scars, one truth becomes clear. No front, no trench, no empire was ever built strong enough to hold back hunger, or hope, or history. The world will never be the same, and neither will Russia. And in the stillness that follows, a new silence begins, one not born of winter, but of redefinition. To the south, another empire begins to fracture, where Austria turns toward the Balkans and finds itself staring into its own unraveling. There is a kind of silence that grows between fences. A silence woven from hunger, boredom, the aching weight of uncounted days. It lives where guns do not fire, but where the war still lingers. In the air, in the ribs, in the memory of boots that once marched with purpose. Here, behind the wire, are the forgotten soldiers, not dead, not victorious, just held by barbed metal, by routine, by the slow erosion of identity. The world calls them prisoners of war. But even that feels too tidy, too official. They are men in faded uniforms from vanished armies, caught in limbo as borders shift and treaties are drafted. They come from everywhere. French conscripts from Alsace, Serbian farm boys from the Drina Valley, Indian sepoys in Mesopotamia, Senegalese riflemen taken in the mud of the Somme, Ottoman gunners captured in the sands of Arabia. They speak in dozens of tongues, yet share the same expression. Eyes that have seen too much, mouths that no longer bother to ask the date. Some are kept in barracks, wooden planks, drafty and wet. Others sleep beneath canvas, or in open fields. In Germany, the camps are organized but cold, efficient but unkind. In Russia, before the revolution, they sprawl like forgotten towns, disorganized, crumbling, full of silence and lice. There are roll calls, thin soup. Letters, if they come, bring more pain than comfort. A mother's death, a child's birth, a wife remarried. The days are measured in chores, chopping wood, repairing boots, learning the songs of strangers, waiting for mail that never comes, for rumors of peace that evaporate like mist. The sick are often left to drift between states of fever and memory. Austro-Hungarian doctors tend to Russian captives in makeshift infirmaries. In France, German prisoners dig trenches even after the guns have gone quiet. In the Balkans, entire columns of Serb prisoners vanish into the mountains, their fates swallowed by snow and silence. For some, captivity is a blur of monotony. For others, it is cruelty in slow motion. There are stories the world does not like to hear, of African colonial troops taken prisoner in Europe and paraded as trophies, of Indian soldiers marched for days without food, collapsing into ditches under a foreign sky, of Ottoman prisoners forced to work British rail lines in the desert, dying one by one under a sun that does not forgive. War does not end when the firing stops. It lingers in paperwork, in loss, in forgotten promises. In Siberia, tens of thousands of Austro-Hungarian prisoners remain long after the armistice. The revolution in Russia has rewritten the map, and with it, the idea of obligation. Some men are released only to find there is no country left to return to. Others are conscripted into red or white armies. Prisoners turned soldiers, fighting in a war they never chose. In the Ottoman Empire, Armenian prisoners disappear into forced labor battalions, their names erased before the treaties are even signed. And in the camps of Europe, those who survive wait, not for victory, not even for freedom, but for acknowledgement, to be seen, to be remembered. A few find ways to endure. They carve games into dirt floors. They teach each other songs, words, recipes. An Indian havildar teaches his French cellmates to wrap turban cloth in the evenings, not out of faith, but out of routine. A captured German schoolteacher starts a newspaper in the camp. 4 pages, copied by hand, passed from bunk to bunk like a warm coal. They become families of a kind, families of fate, held together not by blood, but by the quiet knowing of shared time. A bond formed by waiting and wanting and not knowing when it ends. For every great general whose name is carved into marble, there are 1,000 prisoners whose names were scratched into wood and later washed away. And yet, it is these men, the quiet ones, the missing ones, who carry the true weight of war. Not in medals, but in memory. Not in glory, but in grit. When the war ends, many will walk home barefoot. Some will find their villages gone. Some will find their brothers in graves, or on the other side of new borders. Some will return to places that no longer speak their language. And some will never be accounted for. They remain, even now, in records lost to time, in family stories that trail off at the name of a great uncle last seen in a Hungarian train yard, in faded photographs where no one remembers who stood at the edge. To speak of them is to remember that war does not only take lives. It takes time and names and futures left unread. And yet, from behind wire and winter, a deeper truth hums beneath the silence. The soul of war is not always on the battlefield. Sometimes it waits at the edge of memory, where borders vanish and the land begins to fracture. For now, we turn south toward crumbling mountains, where empires begin to unravel in stone and snow. The war does not end at the front. It only echoes backward, into kitchens and cradles, into telegrams and waiting rooms, into quiet rooms where a woman stares at a window that hasn't opened in months. When men go to fight, the world does not pause. It tilts, shifts, and rearranges. And often, it is women who are asked to hold it up. In France, they stand in the morning frost, with mud on their skirts, taking the place of vanished sons and husbands in the fields. Their hands, once gentle with bread dough and children's cheeks, now grip ploughs and petrol cans. In factories, they bind their hair and roll up their sleeves. Shells must be packed, engines must be made, and coal must be shoveled, not because they wish for war, but because they were never given the choice. Their fingertips stain yellow from the chemicals. The women become known as the canary girls. The poison they pack into weapons seeps slowly into their bodies. Their work is invisible, their sacrifice unsung. No trumpet plays for the woman who labours 12 hours beside a wearing belt, hoping the machinery doesn't catch her sleeve. In Belgium, the air is different. Here, war does not pass by. It sits on your doorstep. It curls into your lungs. It arrests your husband for whispering in the wrong language. Women join the resistance not with rifles, but with secrets. They bake coded messages into bread, hide soldiers in cellars. Their eyes grow sharper than any blade, because even glancing the wrong way might bring ruin. They are teachers, nurses, singers, mothers, but they become couriers, spies, shadows. Women like Gabrielle Petit and Edith Cavell, who serve not just medicine but defiance. They are caught, they are executed, and yet others rise to take their place not with vengeance but with solemn resolve. The front, after all, does not belong only to those who carry guns. It belongs also to those who carry courage in silence. In Serbia, typhus rips through the land like fire through paper. The men are dying, but so are the nurses. Women who crossed oceans to serve, from Britain, from Scotland, from Canada, now sleep in thin tents beside the dying. Some do not return home, but their names live on in foreign earth. Their care, their tending, becomes part of the land itself. Others go deeper. In Russia, the war has collapsed the old order. A new kind of fighting woman emerges, not only healing wounds, but firing back. The Women's Battalion of Death is formed, their name both a warning and a prayer. They cut their hair. They march with steel in their voices. Some cheer them, some laugh. Most do not know what to make of women who wear boots and bayonets. But still they march. In Turkey and in Africa, women see the war through another lens. not of defense, but of occupation. In Senegal and Nigeria, women rise in protest against conscription, taxation, and brutality. In the shadows of empire, their resistance is quiet but fierce. They organize, they strike, they write, and even when they are ignored by the record keepers, they are remembered by the generations that follow. Letters are written in trembling hands. Come home. A girl writes to her brother. Mama is tired. The baby cries all night. I help at the shop now. The customers call me Little Miss. She does not say how she misses school, or how her hands are blistering from scrubbing, or how she hasn't seen her father since the day he left in boots that didn't fit. But the war reads between her lines. Some women find brief freedom in the absence of men, a kind of breathing space that tastes like fresh air and factory smoke. They bicycle without chaperones. They speak louder. They earn wages. But freedom, like war, is fickle. Many are expected to return to silence, to lace, to less. Some do, some refuse. In the war's final winters, grief settles like snow. Women in mourning black gather outside shuttered train stations. The names of the dead are whispered like lullabies. They stitch memorial quilts from uniforms no longer worn. They search prisoner rolls and mass grave ledgers, praying for certainty. Hope is both their light and their burden. Yet they are not only mourners. They are architects of remembrance. It is women who plant poppies, women who build shrines, women who raise sons who will ask, "Where was father?" And daughters who will wonder, "Where was mother when the world changed?" History does not always give them chapters, but it gives them traces. A pair of boots too small to be a man's, a diary left behind in a field hospital, a name scratched into the underside of a stretcher. It is enough, sometimes, to find those traces and follow them like thread through time. The war ends in papers and treaties. But for women, it lingers. In the bones, in the silence, in the shape of what they rebuilt. They were not only nurses and mothers, they were messengers and saboteurs. They were workers and warriors. They were memory keepers. And when they tell the story, they do not speak of glory. They speak of endurance, of waiting, of holding, of refusing to let the world fall completely apart. Their front was not marked on maps, but it shaped the war just the same. And in the quiet after war, a new sound rises. Not the cry of victory, but the first whispers of peace. Where do the fallen dreams go when the guns are gone? Perhaps to the treaties inked behind closed doors, to the rooms where borders shift and empires fracture. The ink fades, but the H remains. War writes itself not only in blood, but in the slow curl of paper carried across continents, folded, kissed, forgotten. In the margins of conflict, there are letters that never reach their destination, sealed with hope, stained with snow, left behind in a coat pocket, in a trench wall, in a boot crushed by frost. We step gently into their silence. In a French farmhouse attic, long after the guns fell quiet, a boy found a shoebox beneath a loose floorboard. Inside, a letter from a man named Henry, addressed to "My little Eloise," who will be 6 in spring. The child's name was the boy's grandmother. Henry, he would learn, had been her father. She never met him. The envelope had never been opened. A stamp from 1917 curled at the corner like a leaf in winter. The letter was never sent, and Aloys had never known his voice. During World War I, over 20 billion letters were sent through field posts and censors and crumbling post offices. Some made it home. Others disappeared, torn by weather, held back by bureaucracy, or lost to the chaos that war brings to every border, even the invisible ones between memory and forgetfulness. What remains is a quiet archive, not of victories, but of yearnings. In a camp for Russian prisoners in East Prussia, one man wrote a letter each week to a sister he hadn't seen in 12 years. He would copy it 3 times, in case one got through. His last letter reads, "If you get none of these, I hope the snow at least delivers the silence." It is not only the words that haunt, but the pauses between them. On the Western Front, letters were read by candlelight in dugouts. Men wrote quickly, often without punctuation, fearing they'd be interrupted by shellfire. "Tell baby I love her." One man scrawled onto the back of a cigarette carton. His body was found later with the carton still in his shirt. There is no reply from baby, but the letter speaks across time. Some wrote letters knowing they'd never send them. These were confessions, goodbyes, words unsaid in life and so pressed into paper like flowers. In Sarajevo, a nurse kept hundreds of such unsent letters from soldiers dying in her ward. One read only, "Forgive me, Mama, I was afraid." Not all silence is absence. Some silence is a whisper that never made it to breath. In colonial regiments, where Indian, African, and Southeast Asian soldiers served under foreign flags, many wrote letters in languages their officers could not read. These were often destroyed or withheld. A Senegalese soldier wrote to his wife in Wolof, "They call me by a name that is not mine, but I still remember your voice." That letter, found decades later in a Belgian archive, was never posted. History remembers the orders, the maps, the treaties, but rarely the tremble of handwriting on damp paper, or the moment before sealing an envelope when a soldier closes his eyes and imagines home. Even censorship cannot erase the shape of longing. During the war, censors would black out phrases deemed too emotional, too political, too real. A letter from a nurse in Serbia reads, "Dearest Eleanor, they tell me not to say what I see. But I will say this, the wind here carries more cries than leaves." The line was crossed out in thick pencil, but the edge of the word, cries, still remains, just visible beneath the erasure, like grief under a calm face. Sometimes, letters arrive a century too late. In 2015, a museum in Canada received a rusted canister dug from the banks of the Somme. Inside were letters from a soldier named Thomas, written in 1916 and addressed to Emma, always Emma. They had never been mailed. No address, only a name and pages that ended with, "If you read this, the world has begun again." Emma never did. But perhaps the world has, somehow, begun again. If only because we now read what she never could. There is something reverent in the act of unfolding a letter. The crease marks, the slant of a tired hand, the ink that spreads at the edge where a drop of water, maybe rain, maybe a tear, once landed. These are small sacred artifacts, not relics of war, but of waiting. War ends loudly. Letters end quietly. They are not declarations. They are questions carried through silence. And sometimes, the deepest ones are never answered. Why did you leave? Will you come back? Do you still remember my face? What is the color of dawn where you are? And above all, did my words reach you? As we listen now, under gentler skies, we can almost hear the rustle of those unsent voices still wandering, a soft chorus in the hush of history. The paper may crumble, but the ache remains. Even in silence, the written word waits to be heard. And just beyond the final unsent letter, there lies a voice not written at all, a voice carried only by wind and ice. They do not volunteer, they do not choose sides. They walk because we ask them to. And when the guns thunder, they do not question, they carry on. The story of war is often told through the words of men, the cries of nations, the broken silence of treaties torn in half. But beneath that thunder lies a quieter march. Softer hooves, wing beats, paw prints across the mud of history. The mule, sure-footed and stubborn, climbs mountains no machine dares ascend. In the high Alps, along the jagged veins of Italy's Dolomite front, they carried artillery piece by piece to heights that scraped the sky. They trudged in silence, breath frosting the air, ropes biting into their flanks. There, where humans struggled to survive, it was the mule that bore the burden of modern war up ancient stone. No medals awaited them. No victory parades, just more mountains. In Mesopotamia and North Africa, camels swayed through desert winds that could peel the skin off a man. With broad padded feet and the patient gaze of something older than empire, they moved supplies across shimmering sands. Camels, who had watched Rome come and go, now watched khaki-clad strangers fumble with maps and sweat into their collars. They did not mock the futility. They simply walked. Then there were the pigeons, small, feathered flashes of resolve. In skies riddled with shrapnel and smoke, they became the last threads of hope. Tucked into baskets, released with trembling hands, they vanished into war-stained air with messages tied to their legs, coordinates, pleas, names. One such pigeon, Cheremi, flew through a hail of gunfire in the Argonne forest of 1918. Her leg shattered, her chest torn by a bullet. She flew anyway. 25 miles, wounded, nearly blind. But she made it. Because on her was the only hope for a trapped battalion. Because sometimes the smallest wings carry the heaviest prayers. We do not always remember them by name, but they carried names, scribbled on tags, scratched into leather straps, whispered into ears during quiet moments before dawn. And then there were the dogs, carriers, sentries, comforters. In the stillness between shellings, they curled beside sleeping soldiers, warmth shared like breath. In no man's land, where death lingered in every shadow, dogs padded across barbed wire to deliver morphine, messages, and sometimes the only love left alive. One soldier wrote of a dog named Rags, who carried dispatches through Paris and the front lines. When men were too slow, too visible, Rags was the answer, slipping unseen past chaos. When he returned not to medals but to open arms. That was enough. We think of war as a human tragedy, and it is. But it was never only ours to bear. In Belgium, horses collapsed by the thousands. Artillery horses, cavalry horses, farm horses. None were spared. They pulled wagons until their legs gave way, until their eyes dulled with exhaustion. Their bones now rest in unmarked fields, their labour long forgotten beneath monuments that list no hooves. Yet they, too, were soldiers of a kind, drafted by circumstance, bound by leather and need. There's something haunting in their silence. Animals do not write memoirs. They do not seek revenge, but memory clings to their absence. In old photographs, in the faded sketches of children who once played with trench mascots before their fathers left for the front, there is a dog in a cap, a pigeon in a coop, a mule looking skyward. We kept them near because something in their presence reminded us of a time before barbed wire, before gas masks, before the world cracked open and swallowed innocence whole. They were the last quiet thread to a gentler past. In the diaries of soldiers, amid all the blood and ash, are the moments they wrote of horses refusing to leave wounded men, of pigeons returning even when half dead, of a donkey who carried wounded soldiers down Gallipoli cliffs, again and again, until he, too, fell. History rarely writes these moments in bold, but they are there. Footnotes of devotion. Tonight, if you close your eyes and listen softly enough, you might hear it still. The muffled clop of hooves in snow, the steady pant of a dog's breath, the beat of wings over no man's land, not the sound of war, but the sound of carrying on. Even in the darkest fields, something walked beside us without anger, without blame. And perhaps that's why we remember. Because after war, what remains is not only silence, but the quiet question, what do we owe to those who carried our burdens without ever asking why? And in that question, we begin to turn toward memory's next whisper. To those who tried, even in the noise, to keep time with music. There are countries that do not fight, but still tremble. On maps, they are painted calms, soft beige between bruised reds and blue-grey storms. Neutral, the world calls them. But neutrality, like silence, is not absence. It is the echo of violence just beyond the valley. It is the trembling of glasses in a quiet cafe when a far-off shell lands across a mountain. It is the flicker in a border guard's eye as a train full of wounded crosses into peace. In the First World War, Switzerland remains untouched by trench or tank. Her peaks hold no blood, but they see, from their cold watchtowers, the Alps peer down into France, into Italy, into Austria, Hungary, and they witness smoke curl from towns too small to name. They listen. In the thin air, sometimes they even hear the gunfire, faint, like someone hammering nails into the sky. The cities within remain bustling. Geneva, Zurich, Bern. Men in pressed coats and women in veiled hats walk by rivers, pretending the world beyond the mountains is only a dream they've chosen not to dream. But the newspapers whisper differently, and behind the public calm, the hospitals swell. Swiss doctors volunteer at Red Cross stations just beyond neutrality's line, quietly ferrying the broken back home. There are soldiers in borrowed uniforms, carried across the border in wagons, their names removed to keep peace intact. Each one a soft breach, each one a reminder. Neutrality here is a performance, solemn, precise and necessary, and yet sometimes it flickers. There are spies on every corner. Cafes turn into conspiracies. A man sipping tea in Luzon may carry messages between empires. Another, in Basel, prints forbidden papers in 4 languages. The border towns do not sleep easily. The line between war and peace is not a wall. It is a tightrope. A step in the wrong direction can tilt a whole nation into shadow. Southwest, in Spain, it is a different silence. The Great War rages across Europe, but Spain remains still, held in amber. Her king, Alfonso XIII, declares neutrality and upholds it more or less. The country is tired. Wounds from older wars have not healed, and civil unrest bubbles beneath the surface like forgotten coals. Yet from afar, war's echoes arrive. In letters from sons who fight for France, in ships that never return from northern ports, in faces seen once and never again. And then there are the refugees. They arrive like ghosts. From Belgium, from Serbia, from Galicia, from Armenia. Families without nations. Children who no longer speak the language of their birth because they've crossed too many borders. The lucky ones carry paper. Most carry stories folded into their silence. Spain, like Switzerland, like Sweden, like the Netherlands, becomes a resting place, not a home. Neutral lands are sanctuaries made of shadows, safe but not whole, welcoming but never familiar. In Geneva, a boy from Krakow grows up in borrowed shoes. In Barcelona, a girl from Lille tries to remember the shape of her mother's voice. In Andorra, a grandmother prays in a dialect no one else speaks. They are not counted in the history books, but they are the true measures of war's reach. These quiet exiles, these displaced stars drifting in strange skies. Sometimes neutrality invites guilt. To witness and not intervene. To know and yet remain still. It is a heavy silence, one that lingers long after the bombs stop falling. In Switzerland, a Red Cross nurse writes in her journal, "We serve all nations, and so we belong to none. But when the boy from Verdun died, I cried for France. When the man from Tyrol lost his leg, I wept for Austria. Does that make me unfaithful to peace?" Her words disappear into a drawer. In Sweden, meanwhile, telegrams flicker through Stockholm like veins. Messages between belligerents who can no longer speak directly. A war fought in mud now travels through quiet Scandinavian offices. Secrets cross snow, covered borders in woolen coats and diplomatic pouches. In the neutral north, history whispers in corridors rather than shouting from trenches. And still, at every edge, there is the border. The place where uniforms change colour, where currencies shift, where language softens and hardens again. The border is where a war-torn man hesitates, wondering if he'll be allowed through. It is where a mother turns back one last time before the guards wave her forward. Borders do not bleed, people do. But borders carry the memory of blood, and they hold it like cold stones in their hands. To be neutral is to stand still while the world burns, to light a lamp but not walk into the dark. It is to offer water but not question the fire. And yet, perhaps there is dignity in it too, in remaining whole, so there is a place to heal. In holding silence, so there is space to remember. Now and then, long after the war ends, a refugee will return to the country that sheltered them. They will stand at the old station platform in Zurich or Valencia or Uppsala and breathe. Some will cry. Some will leave flowers. A few will write letters, never sent, but always intended. These lands did not fight, but they did not forget. And still, across every border and mountain pass, stories linger like morning mist, waiting for someone to listen. Perhaps the next chapter is not found in maps at all, but in the ruins we return to, seeking memory among the stones. The ocean is ancient and patient, a mirror of the stars and a graveyard for memory. Its surface dances with light, but beneath it is still and eternal, a cathedral of salt and silence. In war, it becomes a second battlefield, colder, deeper, and far less forgiving. While soldiers above clash in mud and smoke, beneath them, another war begins. One without trumpet or drum. One that leaves no sound upon the wind. Here, death arrives not with a shout, but with a sudden bloom of bubbles, a steel groan a vanishing. Ships vanish, men vanish, and the sea, eternal witness, rolls on. It begins in earnest with the submarines. The U-boats, as the Germans call them. Undersea boats. Metal beasts that slip silently through the dark, watching from beneath like wolves beneath a frozen lake. By 1915, they haunt the North Sea and Atlantic with cold precision, disrupting not just naval fleets, but the rhythm of civilian life. They do not chase glory, only disruption. Trade routes vanish. Letters do not arrive. Grain spoils on the docks. What was once a battlefield becomes a blockade. Invisible, suffocating. The Lusitania sails in May, a British ocean liner, grand and filled with passengers. Civilians, mostly. It cuts across the Atlantic, believing speed and neutrality are protection enough. But the sea has no such loyalties. A single torpedo finds her hull, and within 18 minutes the ship is gone. Nearly 1,200 souls sink with it, and the ocean swallows their screams. Among the dead, children, writers, mothers, travellers. It shocks the world, but the sea keeps its calm, never confessing. In response, the world listens to the waves more carefully. Countries weigh neutrality against outrage. America, once distant and unshaken, begins to tremble. The ocean is no longer a moat of peace. It is a messenger of grief, its waves heavy with silence. Yet submarines are not the only actors in this deep, cold drama. Minds drift just beneath the surface, their barnacle-covered bellies armed and ready. A gull may cry above, and all seems well, until, suddenly, a ship cracks open from below, and men leap into oil, black water, choking, sea foam becomes a shroud. The survivors, if there are any, do not speak of it easily. The sea does not permit rehearsals. But in this underwater war, there is more than steel and death. There are stories, buried, broken, beautiful in their fragility. Off the coast of Gallipoli, a nurse aboard a hospital ship watches wounded men lowered into boats. The ship wears a red cross and sails under the banner of mercy. Yet she knows it is no shield. Mines don't read emblems. Torpedoes don't ask questions. She writes in her diary that night, a soft entry, a prayer more than a paragraph. Her name is lost to time, but the pages survive, watermarked with salt, a reminder that fear, too, sinks. In the Pacific, Japanese submarines quietly patrol, shadowing merchant ships. In the Black Sea, Russian vessels hunt in silence. Even in the Mediterranean, sunlight on the water does not mean safety. The sea becomes the longest front, stretching across nations, touching coasts that never see battle yet still know loss. It is a strange kind of warfare. No trench to dig, no bugle to sound, just the constant hum of machinery and the claustrophobia of steel corridors. For submariners, life becomes a half-life. They move in shadows, they sleep in shifts. Their world is measured in torpedoes and oxygen, in the flickering of weak bulbs and the ever-present creak of pressure. Outside their hull, the water waits, crushing, vast, merciless. Inside they joke, they shave, they write letters home they may never send. They carry with them a deep, private kind of fear, not of death, but of disappearing utterly and without trace. And some do. There are submarines that vanish even today. No wreckage found, no answers given, only names on memorials and a space in the family line. The sea holds its secrets well. Still, it is not all despair. There are moments when mercy surfaces. Allied ships begin using Q ships, decoys disguised as merchant vessels, meant to lure submarines into surfacing before opening fire. It is dangerous theatre. And in one strange encounter, a British sailor saves the life of a wounded German submariner, dragging him from the waves. They speak no common tongue, but sit in silence beneath the lifeboat tarp, sharing a flask of brandy. The sea is a battlefield, yes. But sometimes, too, it is a place where strangers become brothers, if only for a moment. The war beneath the sea never truly ends. Even after the armistice, the oceans remain haunted. Wrecks settle on the seafloor like sunken cathedrals. Some are visited by divers decades later, their engines rusted, their windows hollow like skulls. Others remain untouched, cradled by coral, swallowed by silt. The fish swim through torpedo tubes. The algae blooms over the names. And still, in quiet moments, a current might lift a scrap of uniform, a brass button, a page from a logbook. The ocean remembers, and in remembering, it teaches that even the deepest silence holds history, that even the blackest depths carry echoes. That war, no matter how far below, always resurfaces in story, in mourning, in the tremble of waves against the shore. And above this watery hush, a different sound begins to rise. The whir of propellers, the hunger of skyward war. For even the clouds were not left untouched. The West hears church bells. The East hears silence. It is November 1918, and in the cities of Paris and London, hats are tossed skyward. Strangers kiss in the streets. The war is over, they say. The world, having been unmade, can now begin again. But if one walks eastward, past the ruins of Vienna, through the snow-muffled plains of Poland, across the hunger-ravaged fields of Ukraine, a different story unfolds. Not one of celebration, but of disintegration. In the East, there is no clear ending, only unraveling. Here, the war does not finish with a signature on a train car in Compiègne. It lingers like a fever, stubborn and indistinct. Borders dissolve. Thrones vanish. Hunger replaces gunfire as the crueler adversary, and where once there were emperors and maps drawn in imperial ink, there are now questions, uprisings, ghosts. In Russia, peace has come not with diplomacy, but with collapse. The Tsar is gone, his family buried beneath snow and secrecy. Revolution spreads like frost, creeping into every hollow of power. In Petrograd, there are parades of red banners and empty bread lines. In the countryside, peasants take what land they can and wonder what tomorrow will demand of them. The Bolsheviks speak of a new world, but no one knows yet what it will cost. And farther south, in the Ottoman Empire, the armistice arrives like a distant echo. It brings no harmony. The old empire creaks under its own weight. In Anatolia, Greek forces land on crumbling shores. Armenians remember horrors not a decade gone. The Sultan remains, but only in name, a shadow on a crumbling wall. What follows is not peace, but partition, revolts, marches, exile, the long twilight of empire. Austria, Hungary, that ancient dual monarchy stitched together by dynastic willpower splinters overnight. Once, the Habsburg crown spanned half a continent. Now it is shards. Hungary declares itself a republic, then a Soviet. Czechs claim Prague, and Slovaks follow. Romanians press westward. In Vienna, once gilded with Strauss and satin, the people burn furniture to stay warm. The emperor slips into obscurity. Not exiled, not executed, just forgotten. Poland is reborn. After more than a century erased from maps, it stirs again, fragile, fierce, and hungry. But its birth is not quiet. The baby republic is barely swaddled when war erupts anew. This time against the Soviets. The fighting moves east, then west again, like breath in a sickbed. In the Balkans, the end of war is the beginning of another kind of fire. Kingdoms merge and fracture in the same breath. Serbia, bruised but unbowed, becomes the heart of something new. Yugoslavia, a union of uneasy brothers. But the ghosts of Sarajevo are not done whispering. Not yet. And through all this, people move. On foot, by cart, by train when it runs. They leave homes, names, even languages behind. Refugees pass each other in the cold. Croats and Greeks, Turks and Jews, Russians and Armenians, each carrying a bundle, a child, a story too fresh to tell. The war has ended on paper, but the world is still at sea. There is no peace treaty that can stop the hunger in Vienna, no armistice to undo the executions in Moscow, no signature to rebuild a village in Galicia burned to the ground by retreating soldiers. In the east, The war ends like a slow sunset, with light lingering just long enough to remind you how dark the night will be. But amidst the ash, there are seeds. In ruined cities, presses begin to hum again, printing constitutions, declarations, poetry. Universities reopen, flags are sown, and though the lines on the map shift daily, something begins. Not peace, perhaps, but motion. Renewal through pain. History does not move cleanly. It stumbles, forgets, doubles back. But the people, the quiet, unthanked, exhausted people, keep moving forward. They bury their dead. They mend their boots. They name children after distant countries or lost brothers. And they wait for harvest, for healing, for a future that feels less like a wound. In time, the world will forget how long the war went on in the East. It will remember the poppies, the trenches, the Western Front's last gunshot. But here, in these borderlands, the silence after the war is louder than the cannon ever were, and it lasts much longer. The armistice comes, but peace, true peace, remains a hope, not a fact. And so the East quiets, but does not rest. As the borders shift and nations blink into being, a question lingers. How do you rebuild a world from the pieces of empire? There are places where history whispers instead of sings, where memory is soft, worn thin by time and neglect, like the names on gravestones that no longer hold their shape. Some wars are remembered with flags and parades, others with silence. This chapter is not about what we know. It is about what we've chosen not to know. We begin on the edges, geographic and emotional. A windswept ridge in the Caucasus, an old churchyard in Thessaloniki, a railway siding in Nairobi, half eaten by vines. And here, in these corners of the map, are stories left behind like old uniforms. Too tattered to wear, too sacred to throw away. In the First World War, the Western Front became the great theatre of memory. It had its poets, its paintings, its towering stone arches. It had Verdun and the Somme and Flanders field. But far away in the Balkans, in Mesopotamia, in the fever swamps of East Africa, battles raged that few remember now. And when the guns stopped, these places went quiet not just in sound, but in story. In Serbia, whole villages vanish between pages of history. In the early years of the war, Serbia loses nearly a quarter of its population. Not just soldiers, but schoolteachers, farmers, children. By 1915, disease walks the land like a second army. Typhus, cholera, hunger. The death is so large, so shapeless, it becomes difficult to draw borders around. And so, perhaps, it becomes easier to look away. In colonial Africa, the war is fought with sunstroke and starvation. The German General Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck conducts a guerrilla campaign across modern-day Tanzania, Mozambique, Zambia. Tens of thousands of porters, conscripted by European empires, march with no boots, no water, no name. They die in the bush, far from their homes, far from the war's end. And most are never recorded. In India, men are promised honor, land, or mere bread. They travel to Europe, to the Middle East, to Africa. They fight in Gallipoli, in Gaza, in Ypres, and when they return, they are often forgotten by the very nations they bled for. Their stories live in family kitchens, not in textbooks. The memory exists, but only as ember, not flame. We walk now through Salonika, in northern Greece. Once a vital military base in the Balkans, now a port city wrapped in Mediterranean sleep. Here, the Allies launched campaigns that shifted borders, and yet history shrinks it to a footnote. In the old cemeteries of the city, gravestones wear names from Senegal, Burma, New Zealand, Egypt. A world converged here. And then, like mist at dawn, it disappeared. There's a reason we forget. Memory is not just what survives time. It is what survives selection. Nations remember what serves them. Governments commemorate what flatters them. What complicates the story, or indicts the powerful, is often left in shadow, and so amnesia becomes not accident but architecture. In Turkey, the Armenian genocide begins under the smoke of war. An entire people, marched, starved, slaughtered. It is denied by governments for generations. Because some silences are convenient, and some graves are not supposed to be found. There is a cost to forgetting, not just the erasure of pain, but the erasure of humanity. When the past is simplified, we lose the full spectrum of its meaning. We reduce it to medals and dates, and miss the trembling hands, the unanswered letters, the unmarked graves. To forget a story is to forget that someone once lived it. But memory is persistent. It leaks through cracks, even when sealed tight. It appears in dreams, in old photographs, in the way a song from another country makes you cry without knowing why. Today, small museums rise in unexpected places. Volunteers gather names from faded ledgers. Descendants trace a path backwards to the silence their grandparents wouldn't explain. And slowly, gently, the forgotten are being gathered again. Not into glory, but into presence. There is a memorial in Nairobi now. For the African porters of the First World War, it took a century to build. But it stands, not tall, not triumphant, but quiet and seen. We end here not in resolution, but in return. The frontiers of remembrance are still being drawn. The war has ended, but its echoes are still catching up with us. If you listen closely, history does not always speak in battles. Sometimes it speaks in questions left unanswered, and in stories still waiting to be told. What else have we forgotten? Beneath the ground, within the silence, behind the monuments. Let us walk one step further toward the edge of memory, toward the place where ghosts begin to fade into myths. There are wars the world forgets, but the body remembers. The front lines may fade from maps, but they remain etched in gestures, in silences, in the spaces between generations. And long after the gunfire has stopped, the war walks home, quietly, and unpacks itself into the rhythm of daily life. Not all fronts lie in trenches. Some are carved into the hearts of those who endured, or those born from the aftermath. There are battles that take place after the treaties are signed. They unfold in hospital wards, at family tables, behind drawn curtains. In the eyes of a child asking about a grandfather they'll never meet. In the way a mother folds a uniform that no longer fits a body. What remains of the First World War leaves not just in history books or under marble memorials, but in things so small we almost miss them. A street named after a soldier no one speaks of anymore. A brittle letter, ink faded, tucked into a kitchen drawer. A grandfather's nightmares, never explained, only endured. A silence in the family tree, a branch that stopped growing. Some call it shell shock, others call it moral injury. Now we call it PTSD. But the soul has always known it. That something happens when the mind is stretched too far across the chasm of grief, when a boy becomes a machine, or when a girl kisses someone goodbye, knowing they are likely already a ghost. There are stories within stories. A woman in rural France who spends her life tending the grave of an unknown British soldier. A man in Berlin who never again walks past a bakery without thinking of the starving winters. A Turkish child who grows old beside an empty plot of land, told never to dig too deep, because the ground still holds bone and memory. And what of those who had no graves, no funerals, no last words? The sea took many, so did the snow. The earth folded over countless men without leaving a mark. And yet, somehow, they still return. In dreams, in music, in the way clouds gather over battlefields, even now. History often speaks in thunder, but healing comes in whispers. The front within us is quiet, not because it is gone, but because it never knew how to ask for help. Some survivors never spoke of the war, not because they had nothing to say, but because words could not reach the place where the war had settled. They became gardeners, teachers, shopkeepers. They married, raised children, laughed. And yet, there were days when the sound of a car backfiring would stop them cold. When a smell, burning rubber, damp wool, wet soil, would fold time in half. These are not stories of heroes and medals. These are stories of endurance. Of people who carried invisible wounds with grace, of those who built quiet lives in the shadows of what they had survived. And we, the descendants, carry them still. In our bloodlines, in our fears we can't name, in the strength we didn't know we inherited. We carry the silence, and sometimes the silence carries us. Across Europe, there are forgotten war memorials, moss-covered statues in empty town squares, graves with names worn away by wind, abandoned chapels with cracked stained glass and faded flags. But perhaps the truest memorials are not made of stone. Perhaps they are the gentle things, the way a family holds hands a little tighter during storms, the way a village gathers around a widow at harvest time, the way we grieve quietly for things we don't fully understand. There is a front that runs through every human heart, a front of compassion, of fear, of memory. And war, once waged, finds its way into that inner terrain. We are not untouched. None of us are. Even those born 100 years later feel the tremors. History does not stay in the past. It travels, it listens, it waits. And so, as we come to the end of this long and quiet walk through the war that was meant to end all wars, we pause not for victory, but for listening to what the war still says. In the wind through abandoned barracks, in the names etched on village walls, in the prayers of grandmothers who never stopped waiting, and in the stories we tell late at night to remind ourselves that even in darkness we kept going. The front within us does not demand medals. It does not raise flags. It asks only this, that we remember with kindness, that we feel with honesty, that we leave space always for mourning and for meaning, because to be human is to carry what came before, not as a burden, but as a thread, one that stitches us to the past and quietly prepares us for whatever comes next. Even the gentlest voices from history carry echoes. And now, as we step away from war's long shadow, we ask the quietest question of all: what does it mean to be at peace? Truly, deeply within. And so, the dust settles on another forgotten front, not with the thunder of cannons, but with the hush that follows. When the wind stills, the last footsteps vanish, and all that remains are memories pressed gently into the earth. Tonight, we wandered through the quieter corridors of war, where no anthems played, no marble statues were raised, yet the human spirit burned just as fiercely in the cold and the dust. In every frost-bitten bootprint, every whispered prayer in the dark, we found echoes not of glory, but of grace. A quiet, stubborn grace. And as we close this chapter together, perhaps we can carry this truth softly in our hearts, that history leaves not only in empires and proclamations, but in forgotten trenches, in unmarked paths, in the breath between battles, where men and women simply endured. Thank you for sharing this hush with me tonight, for allowing your heart to open, even for a little while, to the gentle weight of time. In this quiet space, you are not just a listener. You are part of a thread that weaves us all together across ages, across silences. And now, may you let the day slip from your shoulders. Unclench your thoughts. Soften the edges of your breath. Let your body sink deeper into stillness, like a leaf resting on water. May your dreams carry you kindly. May you find peace in the places no one sees. Your own quiet front held safe beneath the stars. This has been the Sleeping Hourglass, where the past tucks you in and memory becomes a lullaby. If this story brought you calm, you are always welcome to return. No rush. No need to stay awake for it. For now, sleep softly, and may peace come to every front, within and without.